My mill thinks I should be grateful. My husband stayed with me after my accident. Here's how I responded. Throw away because Reddit people are weird. I, 26F, have been with my husband Jake, 28M, for 7 years, married for 5. About 3 years ago, I was in a situation where I ended up with severe nerve damage in my hands, leaving me disabled. I have very little feeling in my hands, and can't do any fine motor activities and struggle to use my hands to do many day-to-day activities. While most things I can manage all right if given plenty of time to accomplish said tasks, the extensive use of the joints in my fingers causes excruciating pain and numbness. For example, typing for too fast or too long, doing makeup, writing with a normal pen or pencil. On my really bad days, I can struggle with tasks like holding the remote and turning doorknobs. Because my husband loves me and is a good person, he's taken on a lot of work in assisting me to do things himself and creating easier ways for me to do things, including wrapping tape or gauze around thinner handheld objects, buying every kitchen tool he can find that has bigger moving parts, and even just doing a lot of things for me. My husband often cuts my food for me, does most of the dishes and cooking, ties my shoes, zips my coat, and a million other things to make my life easier. He even learned how to do eyeliner and blush for the days I want to wear makeup but can't because my hands are numb. We had my in-laws, ML, FIL, my husband's 2 sisters and their husbands and kids, his brother and his aunt and uncle, over for a Halloween dinner party over the weekend. I was having a rough day with the pain and numbness, so my husband did most of the cooking while I sat at the table with my in-laws. My husband let everyone know the food was done and immediately dished me up and brought me my food before getting his, which I of course thanked him for. So after I had finished my food, he went and got me more of whatever I wanted, got me dessert, and took my dishes away as he normally does when I have bad days. And of course I thanked him whenever he did so. My in-laws are aware of my issues, so they don't question my husband doing things for me. However, my MIL likes to brag about what a good person my husband is for helping me, and how lucky I am to have him. Which shouldn't really be a problem except for the fact that she acts like I should be grateful that my husband stays with me and assists me despite my disability. Of course I'm grateful for everything he does, but wedding vows are literally in sickness and in health. Staying with and supporting your partner if they become ill or disabled is the bare minimum a spouse should do. I'm not going to get down on my knees and thank the gods above that my husband didn't leave me when I became disabled, as my Mael thinks I should, because it's the bare minimum. If you leave your sick or disabled partner just because they're sick or disabled, you never loved them in the first place. There has been many instances where my MIL has told me how grateful I should be, how lucky I am, how much I owe my husband just for loving me and helping me in my day-to-day life. Towards the end of the night, my MIL was again gushing over what an amazing man she raised when she said, "OP, you really should be thanking him for all he does for you. Not every husband would stay with a wife who can't do very much. It's a privilege to be married to the kind of man my son is. You need to thank him for staying with you when you had your accident. Not every man would do what he did." My Emil has said some insensitive and ignorant things and a plethora of downright rude and hurtful things, but she's never gone as far as to outright tell me that I should thank my husband for not divorcing me. But I didn't want to take her bait, or whatever the hell it was. I said, "Oh, I thank him all the time for what he does for me." My MIL responded saying, "But did you ever actually thank him for staying with you? Not just cutting your steak, but for still being married to you? It really doesn't seem like you appreciate him much, and it breaks my heart because he's still so kind to you." At this point, I had enough and gave her my honest response. I told her that no, I have never and will never thank my husband for not divorcing me over nerve damage. That it's a spouse's job to love and take care of their partner, and nobody deserves a cookie or pat on the back for staying with the person they literally vowed to stay with in sickness and health. That the common belief that disabled people aren't deserving of love and should be grateful that someone is willing to be with them is harmful and ableist, insinuating that disabled people are less than able-bodied people and don't deserve the same things as everyone else is absolutely disgusting. My MIL got defensive and angry, saying she was only looking out for her son, and I told her to leave. My husband backed me up. She and my FIL left with a huff, but several of my in-laws told me that you should have just let her be, that I knew she was tipsy and getting worked up, and I could have just let her have it. My husband's aunt even told me that going out of my way to not just say thank you was a huge dick move. Eta? My husband frequently shuts his mom down when she gets on like that and did tell her to stop. I'd also like to mention that yes, of course, I'm aware there are circumstances in which people are unable to take care of a sick or disabled spouse. I know there's going to be that person who comes at me with the what-if scenarios. Update 1. So the Halloween dinner was pretty much a disaster thanks to Mill's comments. But I didn't want this to fester and turn into something bigger, so the next day, Jake and I sat down to talk about it. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, and honestly, a little resentment, which I hated. I never wanted to feel resentment towards Jake. He's been nothing but incredible since my injury. But his mom's constant praise of him for sticking by me, and the implication that he's somehow lowering himself to stay married to me, made me question everything. I asked Jake point blank if he ever felt like he was settling by staying with me. He was stunned, like, he genuinely looked hurt that I'd even consider that. He told me he'd never once thought about leaving or resented me for needing extra support. He said he felt lucky to be with me and that he couldn't imagine being with anyone else. His honesty was reassuring, but I was still worried about how much of his mom's attitude might sink in over time. After our conversation, we decided it was time to set some boundaries with Mill. We wanted to make it clear that her constant commentary about how lucky I am needed to stop. We came up with a plan to address it the next time it happened. And, as if on cue, Emil invited us over for Sunday brunch, apparently under the guise of apologizing for her behavior at the Halloween party. Jake thought it was an olive branch, but I was skeptical. Sure enough, when we arrived, it didn't feel much like an apology. She was polite, but there was this undertone to her comments, like she was still stewing about the fact that I talked back to her. Every time Jake handed me a plate or helped me with anything, she shot me this look like, "Aren't you going to thank him?" I did thank him, as I always do, but it felt like she was keeping a mental tally of how grateful I sounded, which was exhausting. Things hit a boiling point when she brought up future plans. She said she was worried about what would happen as we got older, as if my condition would eventually ruin Jake's life. She mentioned wanting to make sure Jake had his freedom to live a fulfilling life, and that she was just looking out for her son. Jake, to his credit, immediately tried to shut it down, saying he was exactly where he wanted to be and that he didn't need her help to figure out his life. Mill, though, just wouldn't let it go. She kept pressing, saying things like, "Well, honey, I just want you to be honest. Don't you ever feel like you're missing out?" I could see Jake was getting frustrated and I could tell he wanted to say something harsher, but he held back, trying to be respectful. Finally, I'd had enough. I told her, "Mil, if Jake felt like he was missing out, he's an adult and he could tell me. You don't need to fight his battles for him, especially when there's no battle to fight." I reminded her that Jake and I made a commitment to each other, and that includes supporting each other through hard times, which she should understand. Mill's face turned red and she went silent, clearly not expecting me to call her out in front of everyone. But then, Jake's dad chimed in. He said, "You know, she's just concerned. No harm in looking out for family." It became clear to me then that it wasn't just Mil. His dad shared her views, too. I started realizing that this might be a bigger problem than I'd initially thought. It wasn't just a one-time comment at a dinner party. It was a fundamental belief they held, that my disability somehow diminished my worth in this marriage. They saw Jake as this hero, sacrificing his happiness to stay with his disabled wife. I felt like they were casting me as a burden, no matter how hard I tried to show that I contributed to our life together in so many ways. And that hurt deeply. I wanted Jake to stand up to them more firmly, but I also understood that it was a delicate situation. These were his parents, and he didn't want to sever ties with them, no matter how misguided their views were. After that brunch, Jake and I had another heart-to-heart. I told him that, while I understood he didn't want to fight with his parents, their comments were hurtful and undermining. I told him that I felt disrespected, not just as his wife but as a person. He agreed, saying he hadn't fully realized how insidious their comments were until that brunch. He promised to be more vocal about setting boundaries and even suggested going low contact if they didn't respect those boundaries. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety at this suggestion. Part of me was grateful that he was willing to stand up for us, but I also knew how much he loved his family. The thought of him having to distance himself from them because of me weighed heavily on my mind. The next week, Jake made good on his promise. He called his mom and told her we needed to talk. I sat beside him, listening in on the conversation. He was calm but firm, telling her that her comments about my disability were unacceptable. He made it clear that I wasn't lucky to have him, that we were both lucky to have each other, and that her implication that he'd be better off without me was hurtful and wrong. Mill tried to defend herself, saying she was just worried about him, but Jake didn't let her off the hook this time. He told her that if she couldn't respect our marriage, she wouldn't be welcome in our lives. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then she finally said, "I just don't want you to regret your choices, Jake." He replied, "My only regret would be allowing anyone to disrespect my wife." After the call, I could see that Jake was emotionally drained, but he reassured me that he didn't regret standing up for us. We both knew that this conversation wasn't going to magically fix everything. Mill's views weren't likely to change overnight. But, for the first time, I felt like we had drawn a line in the sand. I felt supported, truly supported in a way I hadn't before. I was proud of Jake, not because he chose to stay with me, but because he was willing to stand up for what mattered to both of us. It's been a couple of weeks since that conversation, and things have been quiet on the in-law front. We haven't seen or heard much from them, and part of me wonders if this is the calm before another storm. I don't know what's going to happen next, but for now, I'm just glad Jake and I are on the same page. We're stronger together, and that's all that really matters. Update 2. It's been about 2 months since Jake confronted his mom, and things have settled into a strange kind of silence with his family. We didn't hear from MIL or FIL at all during that time, and while it was a relief, it also felt like the tension was just lurking, waiting to resurface. Jake was supportive, standing by the boundary we'd set, but he missed his family and felt like something had been ripped apart. Then, last week, we got a text from Jake's younger sister, asking if we'd consider meeting with the family to clear the air. She hinted that Miel was struggling with our distance and wanted to try to work things out. Jake wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but he agreed on the condition that this conversation would be on our terms. No accusations, no passive-aggressive remarks. If they couldn't respect that, we'd leave. We both prepared ourselves for whatever might happen, knowing this could be the last straw. We met up at a nearby park, thinking it would help keep things calm. When we arrived, MIL, FIL, and his sister were waiting at a picnic table. The first few minutes were painfully awkward, with small talk that made no sense given the situation. Finally, Jake's mom broke the ice, saying she wanted to apologize for her choice of words, and that she never meant to hurt me. She didn't outright apologize for what she'd said, just that she didn't intend to make it seem like I was lucky Jake hadn't left me. I could tell she still didn't understand the problem. It was like she was sorry I'd been hurt, but not sorry for what she actually believed. Jake saw right through it and asked her if she genuinely felt that I was a burden on him. Mill didn't answer at first. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally admitted that, yes, she'd worried about how my disability might impact his life. She didn't say it to be mean, she said, but because she thought any mother would be concerned about the sacrifices her son might have to make. I could feel my blood boiling, but Jake kept his composure, and for the first time, I saw him speak from a place of genuine frustration with her. He told her, "Mom, you keep talking about my life like I've lost something, but I haven't lost anything by being with OP. She's my partner. I don't see her as a burden, and you trying to paint her as one just shows that you don't see her value beyond her physical abilities. And that's unfair. Not just to her, but to me. You're not respecting the life I've chosen." His words were calm but direct, and I felt this overwhelming gratitude for him. He was saying everything I'd felt but couldn't put into words. Mill seemed shocked, like she'd never thought about it that way. She stammered, saying, "I only wanted to look out for you." But her voice softened, and I could tell she realized just how much her words had affected us. For the first time, it seemed like she was beginning to understand that her concern came off as condescending, dismissive, and ableist. Fiel sat silently, glancing between Emil and Jake, looking a bit out of his depth. In that moment, Jake's sister chimed in, saying she'd felt uncomfortable with the way Mill had talked about our marriage, too. She confessed that she'd heard Mill make similar comments over the years, and while she didn't know how to speak up at the time, she was glad Jake was addressing it now. Mill looked hurt, and I almost felt a pang of sympathy for her, She genuinely didn't seem to understand the impact her words had on us. Maybe she was just stuck in her old-fashioned thinking, but this was the first time she'd been confronted by both her kids about it. We left the park on a better note than I expected. Mill apologized, this time sincerely, saying she didn't mean to demean my worth or our marriage. She acknowledged that her way of thinking had been hurtful, and that she hadn't fully considered how it might feel to hear her own son's partner constantly undermined. While I don't think she completely changed her perspective in that one conversation, it felt like a turning point. Jake told her that if we were going to have any kind of relationship moving forward, we'd need mutual respect. She agreed, and for the first time, I felt a small glimmer of hope that things could change. Since then, things have been different. Cautiously so, but better. Mill and Phil aren't exactly super involved in our day-to-day, but they've stopped with the pitying remarks. When we see them at family gatherings, Mill's even started asking if I need anything without making it sound like a martyr's act. It's small progress, but it's progress nonetheless. Jake and I feel closer too. Like going through this together strengthened our relationship in ways I didn't even know we needed. As for the rest of the family, Jake's siblings have been supportive. They've made it clear they're on our side, and I think the whole incident opened their eyes to some of the double standards that MIL had been subtly reinforcing all along. They've been more attentive, reaching out, and even asking if we'd like to have smaller gatherings without the whole extended family. I think they realized that the constant commentary was tiring for everyone, and they don't want to add to that. Looking back, I realized that dealing with Mill's attitude forced Jake and me to confront some uncomfortable truths. It was a reality check about who really supported our relationship and who was holding on to outdated beliefs. I feel like we're finally moving past the grateful wife narrative, and it's refreshing. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect. There's still an undercurrent of tension, and I wouldn't be surprised if MIL has more growing to do. But now, she knows there are boundaries she can't cross, and that's a huge step. So, here we are, in a place I never thought we'd reach. Mill might still have her reservations deep down, but at least she knows now that her way of thinking won't fly with us. Jake's still the kind, supportive husband he's always been, and now I feel like we're on the same team more than ever. We've come out of this stronger, with a deeper understanding of each other and our own limits with family. If Mill and Phil want to be a part of our lives, they'll have to meet us where we are and respect our marriage as it is, not some fantasy of what they think it should be. In the end, I'm just grateful for Jake's unwavering support and for the chance to stand up for myself, knowing I've got a partner who's got my back through thick and thin. I think, somehow, that's more than any apology from MIL could ever give me.